Hello, my name is Dennis, and welcome to my trailer park white trash mobile home kitchen. I really do live in a mobile home, in a trailer park, and this is my kitchen. Today I'm going to make biscotti. If you're not familiar with biscotti, it is a twice-baked biscuit. It comes from out of very olden days when they would twice bake pastries in order to dry it out, so that it would therefore be preserved for long journeys. They would carry it with them on journeys. So that's the history of biscotti. It's sweet, it's delicious. I love to have biscotti in the house, but when I do, I eat it all the time, so I don't make it too often. But let's get into the ingredients for making biscotti. I am making almond biscotti, so I have 10 ounces of almonds. These I have roasted in the oven at 350 degrees for 9 to 10 minutes. The reason for roasting them will be obvious a little bit later on. And then I also pulled out from the bag of almonds 44 roughly good-looking almonds. These I'm going to be using on top. So I use the best almonds for the garnish. Then I also have 4 cups of flour, and I have 1 3/4 cup of sugar. I'm going to be using 4 large eggs plus the yolk inside the biscotti, and I'm going to be putting 1 egg white aside. I'm going to be using that for painting the top for garnish. And then I have 1 teaspoon of anise flavoring, about 1/4 teaspoon of salt, 1 teaspoon of baking soda, and then finally 2 tablespoons of raw sugar. Again, I'm going to be using this in the end to garnish the top. It's very simple. Those are the ingredients for making biscotti. I put my flour in a large bowl, and I'm going to set that aside. That's going to be my mixing bowl. In a medium-sized bowl, I want to put my sugar and my eggs, 4 of the eggs. Oh, put them all in there. I'm going to separate 1 of these eggs. I don't need to do that yet. And then I'll separate 1 of these eggs. Actually, what I want is the yolk to go into here, and then this I'm going to use, set this aside. This is the egg white. I'll set that aside for garnish. And then I can blend this with a whisk. I'll put in the anise flavoring. Might as well do that now. And then I'm going to put my baking soda and my salt in there. All right, I'm satisfied with that. And put this into my flour. And I'm going to use a wooden spoon to mix this up because this is going to get kind of stiff. And there's a nice stiff dough. So I'm just going to set this aside, and the next step is to prepare our almonds. My next step here is to chop my almonds, and I want these chopped kind of fine. That's why I roasted them for 9 to 10 minutes in the oven and I let them cool. They chop much better if they're roasted. They're hard to chop if they're left just the way they are out of the package. So I'm going to put those in my food processor. This makes an awful lot of noise. And I want to chop this up until it is kind of reduced to a powder. Most of it will be reduced to a powder, but there will still be some fairly large chunks in there. I'll show you what it looks like. I want the larger chunks because they'll give the finished biscotti a nicer look. So get prepared for the noise. A little bit more. All right. I want you to see what this looks like. And if you look kind of closely in there, you'll see some of these larger chunks, but there's also a lot of almond powder in there. That's the consistency I'm looking for. I wanted to have those larger chunks. They will actually look nice in the finished biscotti, but by having it all ground up in a powder, the almond flavor will also be well mixed throughout the biscotti. That's the chopping that we're looking for. Our next step is to get the ground chopped up almonds mixed into the flour mixture. This you do with your hands, and let me tell you in advance, it's very, very messy. So we just get in there with your hands and start mixing all of this up. It's very sticky. I mean, this is something you get your kids to do. I'm going to be panting like an old plow horse when I get all of this incorporated. Did I say it was messy? And it gets to a point where you can't even do it in the bowl anymore. So that's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to turn this out onto the counter. And then just start working this with my hands. It's flying. You need this. Kneading isn't going to help to reduce the stickiness, but it'll help to get everything blended together evenly. And then how I usually finish this is I get a knife and I scrape off what I can from my fingers. And there's only so much you can do. So I have my dough here. I'm going to use a plastic scraper to kind of scrape this up off of the counter where it's sticky. And then the best way to work with this, I find it's easy enough to work with dry hands, but if you find it's too sticky, you can also use wet hands to shape this. I want to divide this into two. And then I'm going to bring in my baking sheet here because I'm going to roll one of these into a loaf that'll be just about long enough to fit on my baking sheet. So again, by working kind of quickly with my hands here, I'm finding that it's not really sticking to my hands very much. But it will stick to the counter. So that's it. You just basically shape it into a long loaf. I kind of flatten it a little bit because again the biscotti is kind of flat. And then separate that up. And then just place that on the baking sheet. Okay, and then place this one on our baking sheet. Just going to make sure these are arranged somewhat toward the middle. And then again, just kind of flatten this down. Get that smooth. And then our next step is to start garnishing these with almonds. Okay, we're getting there. You could bake this biscotti as is and it would come out perfectly well, but what I like to do that makes them a little bit fancier is I like to garnish the top of the biscotti with these almonds. These are the 40 or so almonds that I set aside that were the nicest looking. I put them at a slight angle, with about a quarter of an inch of space in between it, because when I cut it afterwards, I'm going to cut it at an angle and I'm going to cut it right between those almonds. And you just press these down into the dough. They'll stick pretty well. So if you can use your imagination, I'm sure you can already imagine how nice this is going to look when it's baked. So my next step now is to make up an egg wash with the egg white that I set aside. Then I'm going to just cover that lightly with egg wash using a pastry brush and garnish it with the raw sugar. To make your egg wash, I put about a teaspoon or two of water in that egg white rather. I'm just going to use a whisk rather to mix that up fairly well. And then using a pastry brush, I want to just cover the top of this. This is going to do two things, this egg wash. One is it will give the raw sugar a surface to adhere to. And when it bakes, it'll give it a very lightly browned surface. It's going to brown anyways, but this helps to improve the browning a little bit. And then you take your raw sugar and just lightly sprinkle it over the top. Sprinkle it on this way to use the rest of it. Okay, and this goes into a 350-degree oven on an upper rack, and you bake it for 35 to 40 minutes. My timer has gone off, so my biscotti is ready to come out of the oven. And the next step is to get this sliced into the biscotti using a large spatula here so I can get this off pretty simply. And then, as I mentioned earlier, I put the almonds on at an angle because I want to cut this at an angle between the almonds. So this is a little end piece. That'll be for nibbles later. And you just basically want to cut through these, right through the almonds. So I'm just finishing up here the last of my biscotti. And then arranged neatly on the baking sheet. So I reduced my oven to 275 degrees. These have to now bake at 275 degrees for 35 to 40 minutes. No, I'm sorry, 40 to 45 minutes. My timer has gone off. My biscotti now is dry and ready to come out of the oven. Oh, doesn't that look fantastic? And then we can just arrange these on a plate. So there it is. I have some biscotti. I have my coffee ready. So let's go stuff ourselves with biscotti. All right, so now I have my dough here. That'll be the outtake. Yeah. Okay. Oh boy. You could get whatever you wanted in prison if you had these things.